Hi, I'm John Cuddeback.
And I'm Sofia Cuddeback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
and raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship,
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live.
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then The Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us. Well, it's always great to be here with my wife, Sofia, and we love these conversations. We learn a lot about what is in one another's minds here when we have these, don't we? Today's topic is the hidden power of music in the home, Trojan horse or genuine gift. So, dear, you're especially the music person in our household. So I know you have some strong thoughts on this. You want to start us off?
Yeah, I love this topic because I just feel like it's so unbelievably practical and impactful on the way we live. And actually, you said I'm the music person in the household. That's why it's a big deal for me. And I actually want to back away from that a little bit. This is not a podcast for people who are really, quote unquote, into music, or about kind of music appreciation in some kind of technical way. This is actually something that's much more important. Yes, I am a musician.
Not there's anything wrong with that.
No,
but
just giving kind of a sense of why this topic is important to me. Of course, there are lots of ways we can consider music, and I love those too. But I just want to, by way of inviting people who are listening who have no experience of music other than just very casual experience or no musical background or knowledge. This podcast is for both people who love music and for people who've never really thought about it very much and just kind of are not musicians. Because I think music is there everywhere in the world that we live in. And I think it really has a tremendous power to impact, form, and shape our lives. I mean, that's been my experience as I look back on my experiences receiving something of music from my parents, living in a musical household, seeing how other people interface with music. And then, of course, for us raising our children and our household, not just for our children, but for myself and for you as well, the role that music, the powerful role that music has had in shaping our home. I'm just so excited to talk about this with you right here, because I think it's really for everybody. We're not talking about some esoteric niche kind of approach to loving music and thinking about it.
And I just add, this is about music and how it affects life, especially life in the home. And today, the main form that, quote, music takes in the vast majority of people's lives is listening to it. So this is not going to be about what music we play or instruments that we're teaching our children or lessons that we're getting,
or whether we should be.
Everybody ends up having a musical taste. Well, what kind of music do you enjoy listening to? Many of us listen to music in the home, in the car, as you're jogging, and so particularly the place of music in daily life. And as our title suggests, we actually think that it's, both. We said Trojan horse or genuine gift. Of course, the Trojan horse was what seemed to be a gift and then ended up being very subversive. Music is going to have an influence, a kind of, I dare say, serious one in our lives, whether we like it or not. And it will be either for good or for bad. And we need to recognize that and tune in.
Yeah, for sure. And I just will share also part of my experience growing up is my father was a philosopher and my mother was a musician. And my experience, and of course I'm married to a philosopher and I'm a musician, but my experience of the conversion of philosophy and music and the way the ancients spoke about music is just, to me, electrifying, because it's two worlds that you wouldn't necessarily think have an overlap. And yet the ancients really thought that it did. And not only thought that they did, but their words are so, they ring with a kind of an insight or truth that to me is just very exciting. And so I think one thing I just want to say at the outset also before we start, music is very much, it's kind of like food in that we all need it. we need it to live. Whether you're a lover of music or not, everybody reaches for music at one point or another throughout their week, their day. We look toward music and we're getting it all the time. And frankly, we're happy. If we had no music, we'd be reaching for something. And so I just think that it's really helpful to try to understand from a philosophical perspective, what is this thing music? Why does it have the impact that it has? I just think it's extraordinary that you read the ancients and it's like, you feel like they're writing, last week for a blog post. It's just so immediate. It's so real and it has such clarity. And I think it's something that we're not hearing a lot nowadays. So, Mr. Philosopher, can you share with some of those incredible quotes with us?
I brought my Plato. I don't leave home without it. I try not to.
These quotes are amazing. And fasten your seatbelts.
It really is. And then we'll throw in a little bit of Aristotle. And of course, it's not just the ancients. The early Christians, Boethius, Basil the Great, Thomas Aquinas. And there's all kinds of, we won't pound out unduly the quotations, but I think, as Joseph Pieper, by the way, modern, great little book he has called Only the Lover Sings, which is a quotation from St. Augustine, Only the Lover Sings.
Such a
of
great
course, we're all
phrase.
Ultimately lovers.
Yeah.
Really, one of his big first points is you wouldn't think that music would be the topic of philosophizing. But he says the great philosophers have always seen that it is a topic of philosophizing. Philosophy is about serious things. It's about kind of the meaning of life, the deepest things, the higher things, and that is kind of really the place to begin. Here's kind of one of the most striking aspects of Plato and Aristotle when they talk about forming the youth. One of the things they talk about more than anything else is music in that formation. It's just really astounding to think about that. Education, both Plato and Aristotle, in their major works. Aristotle's Politics, Plato in the Republic, when it comes to talking about how we forming people, which was always one of their biggest issues, because they had this very clear insight that to become the human persons that we're called to be takes much long, deep cultivation.
Yeah, and also they thought it was important because that's the foundation of forming the polis. Or the state, the larger community, right?
No, exactly,
so it's not just, we're kind of interested in, child education. No, for them, it was a central topic because how the youth are formed is actually how the polis is shaped.
And how you form
the
society.
Common good.
And you want a certain kind of society, you need to have a certain kind of formation, and always central in both of their treatments. It's not all there is in education, obviously, but they saw it as essential in how you're forming people. And so for us also, just from that perspective in our home, I'd like to suggest right up front here, we're going to try to make clear how the wise have said we need to be prioritizing the place of music in view of how it is forming the souls of the people in our home, especially young people, but not just them, our own, particularly if, for instance, we haven't gotten the kind of formation we coulda and shoulda. It's to some extent, as all of us, this is a big part of where we are and where we want to go.
And maybe because formation is never done. It's never like one and done, right? So we're always growing, and we can either be growing in the right direction or the wrong direction.
So let me just throw a couple of things at you from Plato's Republic. First of all, he quotes, I quote, as Damon says, that was an ancient thinker that he's referring to, who wrote about music.
Do you want to tell us what parts of the Republic these quotes are from so people can find them? Or
sure. I'll just, it's primarily in books 3 and 4 of the Republic, and I'll give the number if someone doesn't want to look it up, 424 Charlie, 424C. As Damon says, and I am convinced, the musical modes are never changed without change in the most important of a city's laws.
Wow.
That one's always really struck me when you think of kind of the sexual revolution, the changes that happened in the 20th century, the changes that happened in political societies, and how it absolutely, historically, you can see went hand in hand with a change in music. Now, what causes what? You can't necessarily prove that, but in any case, here just it's an ancient wise man pointing out that these things have always gone together. Well, why? Let's go a little bit more deeply into that. The way that I like to shorthand Plato's position is to say this. One of the key aspects, not the only aspect of music, but a key aspect of music is that it always in some way is imitating something deeply human. More specifically, when it's imitating something deeply human, it's imitating kind of the precisely human quality of life, which we could also say is a moral quality. Mm-hmm. And so different kinds of music imitate different moral qualities or moral states of human persons.
So I just want to just qualify or understand that word moral a little better. We throw that word around a lot, and I think it has a very precise meaning, which helps us to understand the importance of what Plato's saying there. When you say a moral quality, you're talking about something that is subject to our choice. So in other words, not just standing or sitting or asleep, although those things can be represented in some way. But you say music imitates moral states, what you're talking about is the kind of choices that we make in our life, right? Those are the things that are specifically, it's more than just drawing a picture of a tree. We're actually talking about a deep inner life that is specifically related to human beings.
That's exactly right. And so much more than just saying like, well, this music imitates a man building a house. I mean, building a house simply in itself is not yet a moral state. Mm-hmm. But to say this represents a man who is expressing a kind of unhinged anger. Yeah. That has a moral quality to it. Yeah. And so one of the big things here is, and this comes up a lot in, again, both Plato and Aristotle's moral treatments, because that's where they are dealing with this, that the passions are a very big part of human life. Passions in the abstract, you might not say are good or evil. For instance, just anger considered in the abstract, you can have good anger, you can have bad anger. Anger in the concrete, Aristotle would say, is always either well-ordered anger or disordered anger. Mm-hmm. Bodily desire, if you just say bodily desire in the abstract, that could be good or could be bad. Bodily desire in the concrete is always either ordered and thus good, and it has a morally good quality, or it is disordered in a way that can have a morally bad quality. Mm-hmm. And they are asserting that music doesn't just imitate passions kind of in the abstract. Here's anger. It actually, when it imitates passions, it's actually imitating them the way that they are concretely experienced by humans, which will either be morally good or morally bad, or ordered or disordered.
Well, I just have to say, in all of our conversations about this, and we talk about music a lot, I have never heard you describe it that way.
How have I failed you? I'm sorry.
No. I mean, it's just like there are many facets in which you discuss a thing, and maybe you've said it and I haven't heard it, but this explains to me why music is so deeply moving, because you're not talking about abstractions. It's actually a representation of a concrete human experience of either this or that action.
That's exactly what they're saying.
Which is, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm being blown away right now. Again,
That's
every time I hear these quotes, I'm so blown away.
You're allowed to be
that this is why music reaches its hand inside my chest. And, I'm not a big crier. John is a very healthy crier. I'm not a very big crier, but let me tell you, music makes me cry. And that's why. Because it's not talking about an abstract suffering. It's somehow my suffering. I experience it as a very
someone's suffering,
concrete experience. Wow, that's really underscores why it's so powerful.
I'm glad you're reflecting that back to me. It helps me think about it more too. I mean, we'll end up coming to this. Plato's going to give examples of these different moral conditions that are imitated. But one of the incredibly cool things is one of them that he gives is that of prayer. So this is in Plato's Republic, Book 3, 399, A and B, Alpha and Bravo. Just leave me the mode that would suitably imitate the tone and rhythm of a courageous person who is active in battle or doing other violent deeds, or who is failing and facing wounds, death, or some other misfortune, and who in all these circumstances is fighting off his fate steadily and with self-control.
Mm.
That is, so this is not just someone who has fear or pain in the abstract. This is someone who is experiencing fear in misfortune and facing it well, as a courageous man would. And so this is you start to, of course, courage, one of the cardinal virtues. This is the thing for Plato and Aristotle. You actually can make palpably present the cardinal virtues in action, in music. And
which is so much more effective than an abstract representation of them. When it comes to us implementing the cardinal virtues in our own life, they're never an abstraction. They're always a particularity.
Right.
And to be able to actually experience the particularity in our teeth is very different from experiencing it
in our heart,
in our
what
intellect.
Does courage feel like? What does courage sound like?
Yeah.
All right, but check out this next one, is the real jaw dropper. Leave me also another mode, that of someone engaged in a peaceful, unforced, voluntary action, persuading someone or asking a favor of a god in prayer, or of a human being through teaching and exhortation. Or on the other hand, of someone submitting to the supplications of another, or is teaching and trying to get him to change. But that one of exhorting a god, always what comes to my mind there is some of those kind of seemingly eternal melodies of Gregorian chant that are intrinsically prayerful. They intrinsically they capture something of a prayerful disposition, and this is not just in the abstract. This is in a very kind of concrete way, and even different Gregorian chants have been held to express different kinds of prayer, whether it's kind of asking for mercy or giving praise, but that music can imitate and thus have in in some very, very particularly powerful way these moral qualities. And this is philosophy always is about Miranda, things to wonder at. There's so much wondrous. The wise never claim to know more than they do. How can you have sounds that imitate courage? This is great.
And it's concrete.
There's something wondrous about that. Plato's not going to say, "Oh, this is exactly how it works." He more just is before it in reverent silence, but sees it. I mean, the wise are going to say, "But you can see that. You can see that it can. You can see that." I mean, there's something very profound going on there. You couldn't have made it up. I mean, it's more we even if that was composed, it was composed by someone, I dare say, who was discovering in it, right? Something extremely,
or who had that virtue and was expressing their prayer that way. I have to say, this is so funny. This is totally the philosopher and the homemaker having a conversation, because this is so beautiful what you're saying. It makes me want to go, oh my gosh, sweetheart, could we just start all over again and do it better this time? Because what that strikes me, what you're describing there, for me as the homemaker, I'm thinking, of a certain necessity, I've kind of resigned myself to the limits of my home, because I realize limits are good, but it is a limit, and I can only give my children so much within the context of our home. And I painfully feel sometimes the limitations of that. And sometimes it's tempted to become far flung and start doing all kinds of things that actually end up diluting your home life because you're trying to give your children more things. Well, the answer is, if they're listening to great music, they're on the battlefield with the hero who's given up his life for his country. They are in the middle of the American plains as a family is traveling across the country in a wagon, like in Dvorak's American Quartet, the second movement. And the parents are have anxiety over caring for their children as they go across the country. I can't put my kids in a covered wagon and take them across the, Midwestern America as they're traveling west to really experience. But music actually gives us this full spectrum in our limited kind of its nature, the limitations of our household, which are good and beautiful, which we don't want to overflow because we lose something essential to the household, can nevertheless have within it this richness that is, just, the richness of the monk in a monastery who has given his life completely to God, whose eyes are searing with, the gaze of the eternal. We can't do that while we're running our household here in the home. But we can experience it in a really real way if we bring that music into our home.
Amen.
So encouraging.
And, we might not be able to start over in one sense, but in another sense, we can start over. And that's kind of always a big point in our reflections.
Right.
And we start from wherever we are.
Yeah.
And we do our best. But note how also right there, I'm going to start to introduce the note of the Trojan horse.
Mm-hmm.
If we're listening to music that is banal, and right now, there are much stronger adjectives we can use for some of the very common fare. It's not just banal; it's sensuous, it's angry, it's despairing.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're listening, if we're good, if that's the fare that we and our children are listening to, rather than being soul expanding, it's actually soul narrowing.
Or destroying.
It narrows our vision. It makes us less capable of feeling deeper things because we as it were, we get used to the shallows.
Mm-hmm.
We just dabble around in the shallows, and we have this kind of be where we spend our time in this music that has this kind of pop, this immediate appeal, but does not speak of the deeper, richer, more noble sentiments of human life. And so it's like, I'm going to read you a quotation on that right now. It's like cropping on bad grass. And over time, I'm just going to read it. Here's the Trojan horse.
And
I'm going to just say this. I'm just going to say this straight up. Unwittingly, a lot of us parents are not only not exposing the souls of our children to beautiful things that really expand them, we're actually allowing them to get narrowed, to be by cropping on bad grass. Are we to allow someone, this is Plato 401, Bravo, going into Charlie, are we to allow someone who cannot follow these instructions to work among us, so that our guardians, and here he's talking about the guardians of the class he was talking about right now, educating as children, will be brought up on images of evil. And he's talking here, he's including stories, he's including poetry, but he's particularly focusing on music. As if in a meadow of bad grass, where they crop and graze in many different places every day, until little by little they unwittingly accumulate a large evil in their souls. Or must we rather seek out craftsmen who are by nature able to pursue what is fine and graceful in their work, so that our young people will live in a healthy place and be benefited on all sides, and so that something of those fine works will strike their eyes and ears like a breeze that brings health from a good place, leading them unwittingly from childhood on to resemblance, friendship, and harmony with the beauty of reason.
Wow.
So I think particularly that aspect of the are we unwittingly allowing a large evil to accumulate in the soul by just listening to what in the end, if we don't call it full-on bad music, and there is full-on bad music, by the way, and I think much more commonly than we'd like to think. But even just if it's really shallow and not these ones that capture, the courage, the prayerfulness, right? The kind of the glory of human life. Not that, and we're going to get more in the weeds here very shortly and talk about how there is a place for different music. Maybe right now, I think it's fitting to, you're the one who once made this analogy, dear, of music is like food. And there is food for different times. There's different times of the day, different times of your life. There's also food of different quality. This is really good, nourishing things. This isn't so nourishing, but it has its place as being kind of fun food. But there's also food that's just downright bad for you.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe and then food that's not downright bad for you, but if you normally are just kind of cropping on the fun stuff that should be just the occasional, kind of, we'll kind of cut loose here and do something a little different. If we're kind of normally just eating that, you actually lose your taste for the deeper, better kind of food.
And of course, you get sick because that does not have what you need to flourish. But I just want to go back for a second in talking about the Trojan horse and to understand that concept well. I just want to go back to underscore that what Plato is saying. We used examples from his Republic about the good things that music can convey, the virtues in the concrete. What Plato is saying is that music captures and conveys moral states in the concrete. He's not just saying waxing eloquent on good music, good moral states. It's going to capture a moral state, and it's either going to be good or bad. So in a certain sense, there really is no such thing as neutral music,
I think that's
right?
true. Yes.
And so it's kind of, if we use the analogy of food, like you said, we're going to have different grades of music. I just have to share on yesterday, the family came over for brunch and you were looking for something lovely to play. And you put on some Bach piano partitas or something like that. And it was really beautiful. But partway through cooking lunch, I just looked at you and I said, I think we need something a little bit lighter. Can we just put on the Celtic harp or something? And so, so there's times and places for certain kinds of music. Just that it's kind of the most sublime music you can listen to does not necessarily mean you should be listening to it all the time and in every circumstance.
Just like Gregorian chant is certainly not for every time of the day or something.
I think it's important to point out that there's no such thing as neutral music, because I think kind of in my experience as I've kind of gone through the world and rubbed shoulders with people that, especially because I'm a musician, very often I hear people say, "Oh, well, we're not musical. Our family's not musical," and so, in a certain sense, they just listen to whatever music is served up to them. So, in other words, "Oh, I don't really know. I'm not discerning." We just kind of, we don't think about it. We just put on the radio in the car, or we just listen to whatever people's listening to, or the kids come home and say, "Oh, my friends are listening to this," and so we just listen to whatever. It's not a big deal. It's not true. It's not a big deal. The music is saying something, and it is for us to discern, is it saying something good that we want to be formed in that direction, or is it saying something that is actually malforming? Because it's saying something. And I think that's when music really becomes a Trojan horse very often, not because people are going out and looking for something. And this is why maybe the analogy of the Trojan horse is perfect. We just think, oh, we're just listening to music in the car between home and co-op or whatever. It's like not a big deal. But it's actually bigger than they think.
I don't want to interrupt. I got a quotation for you on that one.
All right, let's hear it.
Plato says this exactly. This is in his book called The Laws. It's 700. This is not pages from a particular book, by the way. This is universal pagination of how you refer to Plato's works, and should be in any work that in the margins. In their mindlessness, they involuntarily falsified music itself when they asserted that there was no such thing as correct music. And then it was quite correct to judge music by the standard of the pleasure it gives to whoever enjoys it, whether he be better or worse.
Whoa.
So I mean, this is written for us today. In other words, the common view, we have to recognize this, the absolutely common view of music is exactly what Plato was saying to there, that people don't really think, there's not right and wrong music. There's not good and bad music. It's just kind of what people happen to like or not. And we judge the music by how it makes us feel. And this is part of the big challenge, right? This is one of the hardest things. This is always tough when we come to this with the students, particularly if we've been formed by not very good music or by bad music. Particularly then, it's our taste that can't be trusted. And so people just say, well, I don't like that. Well, this is the music that I like. I'm sorry to be a little bit forward here. I'm going to put it this. Maybe you shouldn't like it. I mean, this is absolutely what Plato's saying. Maybe our soul has been formed in such a way that we have come to like something that we shouldn't like. And this is where this so obviously we start to say, wait a second, that sounds like the moral life. Well, this is the point.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying that there's something deeply analogous here. There are, junk food tastes good. It tastes good, but it's not nourishing. So it's almost like, in some sense, we shouldn't like. It's understandable that we like the taste because it's actually designed to appeal to our taste in a certain way.
As
And
is bad
lower
music.
I mean,
Yeah.
this music is an industry,
Yeah.
and
That's
they
for
they
sure.
they know
They know what
they know
sells.
the rhythms. That is makes me think of Darcy saying, "Every savage can dance." I mean, you play certain kinds of music, and people will start to move like savages would move,
Mm-hmm.
because there's lower passions that music appeals to, and so particularly in our day and age, where the general trend in general culturally is to appeal to lower passions.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what our music does.
Yeah. I want to just break in here and say one of the things you said is, we like the junk food because it tastes, it's what we enjoy. That seems to be implying that the low stuff we enjoy, the high stuff is not very pleasant, but that's okay. You should do it anyway because you like it. I mean, because it's the right thing to do. It doesn't matter if you like it. Now, obviously, there might be a moment when it's like that, but the reality is good food nourishing food is actually delicious.
Right.
Maybe we have to learn how to like it,
Right.
but it's not like if you decide to live the moral life that you're consigning yourself to a life of shades of gray and of no flavor, no taste, no exuberant joy, no joyous movement. That's not at all.
We're at the epicenter of it here, right here. This is the big picture of what it is to be human. I mean, Aristotle and Plato insist the main form of education is actually forming what people find delightful or not.
Mm-hmm.
One way that Plato directly puts it is the goal of education is to form how people feel pleasure and pain, and that they feel them rightly.
Right. That's the key. That's rightly. This is not about a manipulation that makes people think that a certain category of music or food is pleasurable when it's really not. It's just guiding them so that their taste actually appreciates what is actually good and true and beautiful.
Exactly. And this is what I'm saying. We really are set music aside for a moment. This is just key to see, because all these truths are always rooted in the truths of human nature, anthropology, we can say, to use a big word, but just what it is to be human and what the truly good human life is. There's an objective human nature. There's an objective flourishing of human nature. Certain things are deeply delightful. They bring pleasure because they are the fulfillment of literally what we're made for. But life experience shows that you have to cultivate a soul to be able to even find what should be naturally delightful to them, for them truly to appreciate it.
Wow.
And doesn't this correspond with things where, like, those people that we really hold in high esteem, the ones that have really achieved the heights of virtue or of holiness, we're kind of confounded. Like, they seem to really enjoy this kind of prayer or this contemplation or this being just, and they are genuinely displeased at these other things, and so not even so tempted by them often because of where their soul is. That's what we're aiming for in our own life, in the life of our children. And the home is kind of the center of moral formation. Again, set music aside for a moment. This is what we're to be forming the heart, to be forming what we delight in, to deform that what is truly painful. If you think about this, the bad guy, the bully, the on the block, he actually he likes being mean to people. I mean, you can delight in bad things. We all, to some extent, delight in bad things. This isn't, this is all very much part of our experience. So to be coming towards delighting in what's truly good. Right?
And
so
actually,
music is just part of that.
Can we just, sorry, that example of the bully, I think, is actually extremely illustrative, because you can have, let's just picture an old movie where they have a boy. We just watched something where a boy was bullying another boy on the street. Boys can be nasty to each other, and a boy can do something very bad to another boy. That's very different from the boy who does it and enjoys doing the bad thing, right? And we can see that right away is it's not so much that he beat up the other boy, which is of course bad in itself, but that he enjoyed it is what really horrifies us. So that puts into perspective, if there are bad things that we're enjoying, that's actually pretty scary, because that's like the bully who enjoys inflicting pain, not just does it accidentally.
No, that's a great point. And to some extent, that's always going to be the case that, again, we're going to have unrectified desires. Conversion, the very theme of conversion, is fundamentally a turning of our eyes and our heart. And the more deeply we are converted, the more our heart rejoices in what's good.
Which is what we want.
And so this Trojan horse, a genuine gift. Good music helps train our heart to rejoice in what is really good. And at the same time, frankly, that also, the more that we rejoice in what's truly good, we actually will develop, as it were, a distaste for what is bad. But on the other hand, to the extent that we, and again, this is apart from music, but music, you see this in the music thing, the more we begin to delight in the disordered things, that actually takes away our delight in spiritual things. St. Thomas Aquinas loves to point, well, loves, I mean, it's a hard truth, but the more we kind of steep ourselves in the lower disordered things, the more we are literally deafening our ears, numbing our tongue to be able to taste the higher goods. Remember, the word for wisdom comes from the word to be able to taste things as they are. And we are in such an age that doesn't taste things as they are. We find delight in the banal or the evil, and we're not moved by the truly good, wonderful, noble things that we should be. Great music could help us rectify that, and avoiding the bad music can too. Should we start to get, well, there was I know there's one quotation that is your absolute favorite.
Okay, well, while you look for that, let me just say one more thing that what you just said made me think of is that, so listening to bad music doesn't just kind of like, oh, it's bad, it's low. It's actually numbing our ability to see and recognize the good.
Absolutely.
So it's not just, oh, in that moment, I'm not eating the best music. I'm not consuming the best spiritual diet, but it's actually making it harder for us when the beautiful comes our way to recognize it.
It is.
That kind of underscores the import of it.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Okay, so give me that quote.
And after that, we're going to just give a list of some concrete suggestions.
Because I'm sure we've talked a lot about bad music and good music, and people are saying, how do I tell the difference between bad and good? So we definitely want to dive into that.
Remember, we read a quotation or two that's kind of saying, all right, so, but he thinks both the melody and the rhythm have this characteristic. Melody and rhythm have the characteristic of representing these human states and then imitating them. But not only that, then they tend to form our soul accordingly. I mean, that's the correlate that goes right hand in hand. The music tends to put us in those states. It tends to speak that state into us. And in here he expresses this. This is in 401 Delta. This is again in book 3 of Plato's Republic. Aren't these the reasons, Glaucon, that education in music and poetry is most important? First, because rhythm and harmony could also be called the melody there, rhythm and harmony permeate the inner part of the soul more than anything else, affecting it most, particularly more than any other art, more than painting, affecting it most strongly and bringing it grace. So that if someone is properly educated in music and poetry, it makes him graceful. But if not, then the opposite. I just paused. The term graceful here, I don't know the Greek, but I mean, it's very clear that there's a very sense of kind of orderedness, beauty, and there's the richness of, he means both kind of, it has a material element, but he's talking about in soul, this kind of orderedness. Second, because anyone who has been properly educated in music and poetry will sense it acutely when something has been omitted from a thing and when it hasn't been finely crafted or finely made by nature. And since he has the right, so much to talk about there, but we can't. Since he has the right distastes, he'll praise fine things, be pleased by them, receive them into his soul, and being nurtured by them, become fine and good. He'll rightly object to what is shameful, hating it while he's still young and unable to grasp the reason. But having been educated in this way, he will welcome the reason when it comes and recognize it easily because of its kinship with himself.
Oh, that is just so unbelievably
jaw-dropping,
beautiful, but also I find encouraging. I don't know if dads experience this way. I know that for myself as a mother, I experience this way. And I've talked to a lot of friends who bear the same burden, where it's just sometimes feels the job of raising children in a way that's good and beautiful is just beyond me. It's just overwhelming. It's like how there aren't enough hours in the day. And you start feeling like, well, if I had one child instead of 6, I could probably do this, which is, of course, a silly kind of hubris to think that way. But I think it points to the fact that you feel overwhelmed. You want your children to be good people and to enjoy good things and to be good for other people. And somehow it just seems like the spectrum is way too broad for you to cover. So when I hear that quote in particular, I'm just like, that's it. That's the answer. I can't cover all the bases, but my children can be listening to music that is forming them that way before they're even capable of a moral act, and they're still very little.
Yeah,
if they're listening to music that has courage in it or nobility or self-sacrifice, they're learning the spirit that is behind thank you and please. And no, we don't hit our little sister. The child could look at you and go, why? I mean, I want that toy. But if they're listening to good music, that education is already happening. And then you, as the limited human being that you are, and it's because you feel that as a parent, are allowed to play the limited role, which is enunciating, giving direction, in a larger context where there are other things that are actually forming your child in some ways much more profoundly than maybe your words are. So for me as a mother, that particular quote is just like, I just feel this happen. Like, oh my goodness, that's the aid I've been looking for.
I hear you. And let me just say what I think might be a helpful clarification of your astoundingly good point. I think when you say it's the answer, I think you mean it's a part of the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're being very enthusiastic, rightly.
It's the help.
And I just think, obviously, we don't need to say, but let's just say it. We're not saying somehow, here's the good news, just start playing Mozart and your children are never going to hit one another again.
No. Yes.
It's a much missed, beautiful, powerful tool. It is certainly not a cure-all. Mm-hmm. It certainly is part of a bigger picture that has many other very beautiful elements in it. Mm-hmm. But it's a big piece. And clearly these wise always thought that was the case. And that's why they give it so much emphasis. So we're not trying to make it sound as though here's what's going to solve all the problems.
Of course.
But it is an astounding, genuine gift. Or in any case, let's start to act to make it be a genuine gift rather than, because we haven't said much about, again, we said a little bit of the Trojan horse aspect.
Yeah.
That it can be undermining the very things that we are trying to teach them, that they're listening to music that is saying the opposite of the things we're trying to teach them.
Yes. And I think that is very worthwhile underscoring. I mean, I think there's some parents who are having this experience where they're trying to form their children in basic manners of courtesy and habits that allow people to live in a community, the community of the family. And they're frustrated because why is this not sticking? And then in the meantime, if the music that they're listening to has a frenetic beat, that is just, then you're kind of like, well, why are my children always so like not able to settle down to a book? Oh, my kids can't read books. Well, if they're listening to a music that's frenetic, that has a frenetic beat, that is forming them in a certain direction. And the parent is saying, I'm working really hard to inculcate good things. It's not sticking. Is it possible there's something else that is teaching them something besides what you're speaking? Or if you're listening to music that is angry, is your child angry? Or if you're listening to music that of its nature is solipsistic. It drives one inward to one's personal exclusive experience or a selfish expression of love. Those are things that then,
Totally.
and then it's not surprising if you say, oh, I don't know why my children seem to be very territorial about their personal belongings. You know, if you're listening to a kind of music that is expressing a selfish, territorial, possessive love
Great
between
point.
people, these are places that you can look if you're having problems in that regard.
Again, this isn't as though we're going to point the finger. Yep. Music is the cause of all these problems, but it goes along with them. And I have said this before.
Makes your job harder or easier.
Exactly. That it might be the case that parents experience the surprise of, I've tried so much to convey X or Y about the good life, and my children are really struggling to see or experience that, or kind of take that on themselves. There are many reasons that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I honestly think that one that is way under considered is the way that the principles of our disordered, hedonistic, often despairing, sensuous, angry, rebellious culture is being spoken into the mind and heart of our children is through music where, may I put it this way, obviously, often the words are precisely saying these things that are so obviously contrary to our worldview. And the music, the melody, and the rhythm is saying the same thing and actually saying it much stronger
than the words.
And so the big mistake of some people saying, "Oh, I don't listen to the words." Maybe you don't listen to the words. What you are listening to is probably worse because it's speaking it
in a more visceral way in the body
and in a hidden way. In a way that's not explicit, and it's hard then for the parents to point out if the parents have an intuitive sense, and how often parents do have the intuitive sense of, I don't like what this music is saying to my children, but how do I explain it? Well, this song doesn't happen to have any particular bad words. That's not the issue. It's the whole package. Let's start to. I want to make some concrete suggestions here so we can. So let's think out loud. I've noted down a couple here. I want to say, I always love to begin with this. Start today and be intentional. Wherever we are, we can begin again and improve. And let's say, all right, that already is is a great start. And there's going to be a positive and a negative aspect here. I love the principle. The no's that we say are always rooted in some yes. So in view of the good life, in view of the beautiful and noble things that we want for ourselves and for our family, we are going to be willing to say no to certain things. And our no has to be rooted in a well-formed vision of what the good life is and the connection between music in it. And my next would be, I think in this area in particular, we have to be willing to be humble. It takes a humility to receive a gift. It takes a humility sometimes to recognize a danger, maybe a danger we haven't seen before, or maybe a danger that's not immediately clear to us. I think we kind of have this tendency to go, no, come on, that can't be that big a deal. Is that really that big a deal? I think it takes a certain humility to just say, you know what? The wise have been concerned about this for time immemorial, and there's good evidence, if we honestly look around us, at the deep connection between music and whether we're doing well in living a human life or not. And so to kind of begin with the humility, are we willing to take a new view? Are we willing to be courageous? And music is very close to people. I mean, I heard one person once say, one thing the youth will not give up is their music. They intuitively have the sense of, no, that's very close to who I am, to what I do. I remember there was a song called "We Built This City on Rock and Roll" when I was young. That's actually a profound statement. Very often there'll be these little profound statements that come up in bad music.
Mm-hmm.
They have built a city on rock and roll, and I don't think it's a city we want to live in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, are we willing to be courageous here, and are we willing to be humble and kind of start again? I think we need to then more specifically start to take inventory.
Mm-hmm.
What music do we just need to think in terms of removing? And maybe just the
Mm-hmm.
very practical starting point is, all right, I'm not exactly sure how to judge these. All right, so take a deep breath. Trust your intuition here, kind of with a certain humility. Trust your intuition of is this music in accord with my worldview?
Mm-hmm.
Is this music speaking good things to me and those around me? And recognize that we can just begin by starting to thin some of that stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Just from that's a great way of starting to ask that question. It's a little bit abstract to give a little bit more of although it's not as abstract as it sounds, but to give a little bit more practical ruler to use. When you're talking about rhythm and melody, rhythm is prior. I always say to my little singing students, it's like the rhythm in music is like the bones in your body. No matter how beautiful your body is, if you have no bones, it's laying in a puddle on the ground. So in a certain sense, the bones are prior to, the skin, the tissue, the muscle, all that kind of stuff, the beauty that we immediately expect. So the rhythm is prior to melody. However, just like in the body is adorned with the external, and that's what makes it beautiful. And so when you look at a person, you don't go, wow, look at his skeleton. You see the composite person, right? And which includes the bones, but what you see is the exterior. Mm-hmm. So in that way, with music, it's the same structure. You have rhythm, which is absolutely essential. If you change the rhythm of the song, it becomes almost not recognizable. But the melody should be the thing that you hear, and that presents itself first. So if you have a piece of music that is heavily rhythm forward, a rhythm that is very mono, kind of like it just repeats itself over and over again, and it's very loud, that is a sign that it's a disordered form of music. It's been inverted. It's like someone wearing their skeleton on the outside. That would be kind of macabre and gross if you saw people walking around with a skeleton on the outside. It's that way for music too. So you can use that as a small litmus test in judging whether, now obviously there could be other things that make music inappropriate or not good, but as a very fundamental beginning, you can say if the rhythm is prior or dominant, then this is probably driving me in a way that is less than ideal.
There's probably exceptions to that. I'm just thinking martial music might have a kind of
yes, but think of it's prominent, but it doesn't, it's very present and it's very strong and you can hear it, but the melody it's very present. If you're really listening to fife and drum corps or something like that, yes, the rhythm is very present, but the melody is what your ear looks for, right? Whereas there's music that is played that it's just like that beat just gets us thumping, and whatever music and the words are happening, fine, whatever, but it's the beat that's really speaking to us. That's a disordered form of music.
And I think, again, we're gonna there's so much more to go into it. But the thing is, we don't have to get hyper technical here. To some extent, we really can, I think, trust our intuition. But part of that is we have to be willing to recognize there's the dominant kind of, I'm going to call it, for lack of a better term, kind of rock beat is too dominating, and it is sensuous. And there's, we don't have to go further into this. I've done some research into it. There's an obviously kind of more sexual overtone to it, and that is part of why we can say that it is sensuous. And I think it's a thing that I like to point out, I think that's good for us all very practically, is how does this music tend to make us move? If it tends to make us move in a way that's not dignified, that's immodest, then right off the bat we know that there's a problem here. Good martial music has its place for men going into battle.
It makes you stand tall,
but it makes you stand tall. It doesn't make you move in an undignified way. So there's a such thing as good martial music. this appropriate to its place and time.
Of course, another thing that we mentioned that would be a litmus test is the words. Do listen to the words, because the words are driving the melody, which is moving you interiorly. So, of course, the words are important. And then I would also say the way the words are said, the vocals, if you're listening to vocal music, of course, because there can be non-vocal music, but sometimes the way the words are said is in a tone of voice that is very sultry or very sexually oriented. Mm-hmm. That is a very, very formative thing, I think, spiritually, to hear words being said in a way that's very seductive. Yeah. Then you would want to be aware of that. And then as regards words, you say, oh, it's just a love story. But if the words are turning inward so that so it basically is you and I and no other, that is also an indication that maybe this kind of music is not fostering the right kind of spirit inside of you, because it's a deep exclusiveness or sometimes total solipsism, where the person is just turned inside on their personal experience of another person or their love or whatever. And so it's not that any love songs are a problem, but just that would be kind of a litmus test. Why this one and not this one? That could be something that would be helpful.
And I mean, I think, again, I want to let's be honest and trust our intuition. A lot of parents they have that sense. Yeah, we kind of had the sense that this wasn't very nourishing. This wasn't very healthy. But it's what the children do. It's what's so common. What else is there? These are real problems. We can't solve the problem right now of in a terribly concrete way of, what are we going to replace this with, other than to note the principle, and we're going to offer some help that we're going to moving forward, some resources at the website. We do need to replace this with good things. If we're saying, okay, we're going to start to be cutting out this lower, the things that tend to be despairing, the things that tend to have unhinged anger. I always like to point out, you might say there's a certain anger in martial music, but is literally, it's representing the anger of a courageous man. There's an anger that goes with courage, that's well ordered. Mm-hmm. Whereas there's the kind of unhinged anger that is so commonly represented
and
now,
is destructive
and tends to be. And it's a very different thing to listen to that kind of music before going into a football game versus listening to courageous music before going into a football game. So much is going on. If we look through this eye, is the music representing human dispositions, disposing us in a way that seems to be very much in accord with good morality, human dignity, modesty, kindness and charity, strength, but restrained strength. So we start to think in those terms, and we also turn to others. We might recognize, hey, we're going to need some help on this. Mm-hmm. One thing, and you've said this before, dear, is turn to some of the great musicians and composers that we know always are going to be producing kind of more noble, dignified music. It's not that it's the only music we listen to, but something like a Bach, a Haydn, a Mozart. These men are kind of set apart in a certain way, among others, that they captured deeper things. They captured those more noble emotions in of different kinds. And this is the kind of good stuff that as we're starting to substitute out the lower, we're starting to more cultivate and build in the better. It's incremental. We don't have to go cold turkey.
Yeah. I think this is probably a perfect place to stop. But before we go, it's a perfect segue also. I would love to make a plug for classical music, as you just did, which is challenging, and you might need to learn how to listen to classical music. So I want to propose that we do a podcast on how to listen to classical music.
All right. Well, it's hard to say no to that.
That sounds good.
You're going to be better. Well, I mean, I would, if you don't mind, I'd like to just mention one other thing before we close.
Yeah, sure.
Liturgy.
Beautiful.
There's an incredible gift in the liturgy this has always been seen by the church. Certain kinds of music go with worship. And a great way to develop good musical experience, taste, feelings, noble feelings in the soul is to expose oneself to great liturgical music in the context of the liturgy. Not just exposing one. That's part of how we enter into prayer. But I like to just toss out with that, and this kind of heightens the all that we've been saying. We need to prepare ourselves to be able to experience that.
Yeah.
The rest of the music in our life should somehow be, I'm going to put it this way, and we have to think more about this, what this means, but I think it's a very reasonable way of putting it, has to be in some sense of a peace with that.
Yeah.
Not all music is going to be liturgical music, but some music obviously is contrary to
Antithetical,
it, is
sure.
speaking something different, is fighting it. Whereas good folk music is not anti-liturgical. It's not liturgical, and it should not be used in liturgy, but it's not at odds with it. And so there absolutely is the place for these different kinds of music, as long as they have a kind of richness. And we have so much in our Western tradition, other traditions too, that we can kind of rediscover and bring that out. But give us a closing thought, dear.
No, I was just going to say, when you said it's folk music isn't specifically liturgical, I would say maybe it's lowercase liturgy. And that's how we should see our music, is that all of our music that we engage in is a real affirmation, appreciation, celebration of what it means to live the good life. It's your lowercase liturgy that has its kind of culmination or crown in an experience of the music of uppercase liturgy.
Amen.
And so really the two become a seamless thing. The lowercase liturgy and the uppercase liturgy actually become a seamless garment.
Which is the way our life should be, and that can be represented in our music.
Yeah.
Another practical resource that we want to mention is what we call the 2-week challenge. It's at our website, life-craft.org. If you just search music or 2-week challenge, there actually are playlists there of some great classical music. It's just the beginning, and we're going to be adding more, but also gives a very concrete exercise that you can do, a kind of cleansing of the palate, setting aside other music for 2 weeks and just listening to this music. It's just an idea. It's something that's worth considering. A number of my students have really appreciated doing that. Most importantly, perhaps, there is the resource of some great classical pieces that could be really helpful, and we're going to keep building in more. And those, of course, mostly came from your great experience, dear. Thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks for tuning in this episode of The Intentional Household. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. If you have any topic requests, please send them to lifecraftgroup@gmail.com. For our Wednesday reflections, free courses, reading groups, and live events, please visit life-craft.org.